As a public service, as they ask us to do on the station periodically, we'd like to point out that in this day of increasing concern about highway safety, and this continuing question also as to whether the real elderly should be allowed to continue to operate motor vehicles on our highways, we here at New Intelligence like to point out the obvious solution is simply don't let them drive sober. Oh, also, since there seems to be some concern over our program being controversial, and we get some comments about it, they also ask that due to that one of those bureaucratic rulings of some sort, that we allow some time for opposing views. And so at this time I'd like to set that. And to start with, we have a letter from a viewer that I wanted to. What do you really mean? What is the difference that you really intend, that you mean between your use of the words mere thinking and some kind of new consciousness? The answer to that, I'll put it to you first. It's within this. I'll put it to you as a question so that you may contemplate it. The difference would be, let me put it this way. Let me ask you these questions. The difference, they asked me the difference between what I intend, or would be the difference between merely thinking and some form of different new consciousness. Put it in the form, a multi-directional question. During their heyday, the glory days, what did the people of Athens refer to themselves as? Athenians or Greeks? And do you pronounce the capital of Louisiana New Orleans or New Orleans? And being in the map and globe business nowadays, is business better or worse? And of course the answer to all three is neither. I trust you follow. First off, from last time, another one of our little wrap-ups. You recall that I was talking about how man's invented post-survival world, the civilized world, it does in fact grow, develop organically, and it is not seen as such. And I was using as an example traffic courts and pointing out that they are in fact not courts whatsoever. They're simply misnamed tax offices. And the little part that I didn't wrap up and cram in your face, which now that you've had the time to think it over and you should have done it yourself, let me point out. It was still on the basis, remember, that this just organically happened. It was not some conspiracy. Nobody decided to do it. It happened as naturally, as organically, in the true, or one of the true definitions of the word, as great fungus fields grow in a forest, and etc. It is now no longer a traffic court whatsoever. It is no longer a court. But notice part of what it does, now that it has outgrown its name, it gives people, it promotes those who ever have any contact with it, it promotes them to feel outraged, to feel a sense of injustice, and certainly to justify their criticism. Because they are correct on the basis of them walking outside. My example of a man who swears he did not make a left turn when the cop gave him a ticket and said he did, and he brought down 4 people in the car with him, 4 sane, middle-class people, and they all say no, he did not turn left. And the cop said, yeah, he did, and the judge said, you have more witnesses? And the guy says no, and he says guilty. They're standing outside, all 5 of them, complaining about the injustice of it and it not being a court. And see, now I already told you in advance, it's not a court. But notice it has simply outgrown its name, and they have not changed the name. And chances are they never will. But it is not limited to my example. It's why I called it a what? Example. The civilized world is full of, or for those of you who like more syllables, replete with examples. They're everywhere. In fact, anything that ultimately survives in the civilized world, man's invented post-survival world. If it survives at all, it is going to organically change. It simply does, or else it disappears. It gets dinosaured. So everything changes, and eventually, given long enough, if something lives long enough, it can very likely turn into, I won't be crude enough to say its opposite, but something that has, in an operational sense, no resemblance to what its name is, such as traffic court. And court means a place to get justice, a place to hear your case argued. You know, and they do some of it. The judge will go, all right, you insist, you've got something to say, say it. And you say, well, I didn't turn left, and I got 14 people here to say I didn't either. Is that all? Yes, guilty. So it has, and you got a guy dressed in a robe, remember, and they call it court. Those involved still call it court. And it is not a court. But notice everything in life, and I could pick out, or you could, rather than me single out anything else, all right, I could pick out education, religion, anything in the civilized world, anything that is not part of what people normally call the natural world will eventually, if it lives long enough, will eventually outgrow its name. Its name will become outdated, will become tenuous in its connection to the operations at best. So think about it. Any form of civilization that has any longevity to it already, well, you'll have to see that for yourself rather than me try to tell you how long, because it changes. But if you look, then anything that has any history to it, there is a legitimate way from an ordinary view that you can look at it and criticize it. All the way from criticize to be outraged, such as, that's not a court. He's right. But it's named a court, and everybody looks, it's a court. It looks like a court. You ask, is this traffic court? And they go, yes. And that's a traffic court judge? Yes. This is the court? Yes. And it all seems all right until you go inside and find out that it does not operate as everyone agrees a court should operate, because that's not what it is. Any form, any activity in the civilized world, the post-survival, invented world of man, will fit that qualification if they live long enough. And besides, our great friends, fungus and trees and birds, our great friends, institutions such as religion, how about this? Let's make it more personal. When I say that anything that lives in the invented world long enough, that survives long enough, its name will become outdated. How about this, a more personalized level? How about such things as I? Or, quote, man, the thinking animal. Or man, the logical animal. Or, what kind of guy I am. I was going to stop there, but if you tell what kind of guy you are, once you understand the real nature of time, as soon as you tell what kind of guy you are, you're a liar. You're a traffic court. There was also, to tie all this together, that's not a complete change from what I was going to do. There was also one from last time that pointed out that maps will eventually, and we're talking about the civilized world now, the invented world, maps will eventually become of more importance to ordinary thinking than the destinations they represented. Put it to you another way, that anyone who tries to think beyond the bio-civil survival level, anyone who tries to think at all in an extraordinary manner, you're eventually confronted with either getting entangled with, which amounts to apparently depending on, or struggling against a map, a system. Did I not give a big enough preface to this? Thinking is dependent upon, ordinary thinking is dependent upon things apparently being systematized, systematic, which is, I'm just using an extension of a map. And even if you apparently try to get involved, if you apparently in any way try to think beyond the post-survival level, or beyond the survival level into a new era, if you try to push your thinking there, you find yourself clawing, demanding, dependent upon, entangled with some system, or else you feel as though you're struggling against it. there is a difference between the organic and the systematic. Plant life is organic, botany is systematic. When you get past the survival level and you try to think of anything, if it does not very shortly become traffic court, if it does not very shortly become some apparent form of a systematic map, you cannot think about it. That's the direct way. An easier way is you will lose interest in it. We're getting around to talking about what this is, you understand, what you're up to. To give us a verbal springboard from which to jump, to start, how about I pick out what is, comparably speaking, to our part of the world here, the least systematic transcendental tradition, Buddhism, compared to Western forms of Christianity and belief, and etc. And as you know, I'm not about to try and give some historical review of Buddhism, although I must point out that my version is superior to the quote official one. But for the sake of comparison, I assume all of you know enough that unless we get into real fundamental forms, obscure forms, but just Buddhism in general, and the guy supposedly Buddha, does not resemble in any systematized form the ritualistic traditions and approaches of Christianity, Judaism, any known Western religion or philosophy. Of course, for it to survive this long, which I wasn't getting into, but you must notice the obvious, it is now practiced and looked at in a somewhat different way. Which you can also look at, makes it a real trick for them to take a man who said, this has no system, I don't have anything to preach, and it's now a religion. But at least you think they can't do it. Remember, traffic court. It says traffic court, and you'll dress up and go in there and go, all right, I won't say a word for justice, I'm not guilty. And you were guilty when you showed up. You just didn't know it. So don't say, well, how could they do that? But at any rate, so that you know where we are, I was going to take that as a springboard from which we could verbally start off. What would seem to be the least systematized or systematic form of any sort of would-be mystical, transcendental, extraordinary philosophy / belief system / practice / tradition, the whole thing, would be Buddhism. And yet, they have Buddha. Buddha is said to have said that his enlightenment, was not complete until he realized himself whatever the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Noble Path. But it just slides through people that don't pay any attention. And the man himself is also reputed to have said, and again, notwithstanding real attempts to turn it into a codified fundamentalist religion, if you just take the general non-theological side of Buddhism, from its most liberal form of Buddhism into Zen, it has no system. He said it had no system. He had all sorts of, they keep repeating it, they say he said, and whether he gets it or not doesn't matter, remember. It's the impact it has had on human thinking. That it is said that he said that this is a singular affair. It's between you and your own understanding, and it's an attempt to get back in touch or to get in touch, blah, blah, blah. And yet they have him saying, quoting him, that his own enlightenment was not complete until what? And forget all the fourth paths or eightfold stuff. All he's saying is, even I didn't understand what I understood until I had a map. I think for the sake of any possible increased consciousness that may happen on anyone's part, that we should stop here and at least have a moment of regrettable, if not humble, if not puzzled silence. Of course, that furnishes them, and anyone who's interested in it, but that furnishes them with the beginning step of it being a system. Rather than just being a strange, apparently unconnected string of television things that the man said and things that they have to show that, wait a minute, there has to be something to be done. There has to be some specific map. Now, I know that I've said map and system enough times that some of you take it as an insult, which sometimes I mean to get your attention or make you look in a certain way. But here's what you've got to consider. To begin with ordinary thought, anything that people ordinarily do, we've been through this, but I'll remind you, it has to apparently have some map to it, some set of instructions, something we're going to try to do no matter how simple it is. A bunch of people get together and say, well, let's start a bird watching society. And some people show up and say, okay, I'm sort of interested, what do we do? And so the first thing you got to do is have some sort of organizational meeting. Well, all right, let's elect officers, and let's decide what kind of birds we'll look for. Let's decide who we'll let in. Let's decide how often we'll look. You got to do something or nobody will show back up. If the guy says, if somebody stands up and says, well, let's start a bird watching society, and you show up and some other people, and they say, well, I like that idea. I like that. What are we going to do? And the guy says, I don't know. And he seems to be in charge. You look for him, he's the guy that thought of it. Maybe he says, well, come back Wednesday. I'll be here Wednesday and we'll go into it further. And you come back Wednesday. And he seems to talk about everything except the specific details about, well, what are we going to look for and how often do we meet and what do we have to wear and what kind of binoculars should you recommend. There has to be an apparent map, and then there has to finally, the map is like just somewhere to start. So, all right, the purpose is to watch birds. They go, okay, well, just want to be sure we got it straight. No doubt about we're going to look for birds. We're talking about birds that fly in the air, yeah? Okay. So you could say that established the map. That at least we know we're going from here, that we're just a group of just people, just individuals, but we're going to become a meeting, collective group of like-minded bird watchers, and our purpose is to watch birds. That's the map. That will do maybe for 1 or 2 times. Then it has to become systematized. There has to be subsets within the map. Eventually, the map, in the same way that everything grows organically and everything eventually will become misnamed, the map, the system itself, will ultimately, inevitably, take on more importance to ordinary thinking than the destination. Now, I've done this before, so I'm not going to stop and start drawing examples, because I can take any example in the world, all the way from religion to bird watching societies to Harvard, to a truck driving school. And I can show you, and it sounds like Captain Irony flew through the window. I can make it sound sarcastic if we were that sophomoric. That everything eventually, that here seems to be the aim. The sign says, here's what we're in charge of, or here's our field of interest, and you show up and you hang around long enough, and you can finally legitimately say, well, you guys are not doing that. They go, come back next week and we'll take that up, as a matter of fact. You're not the first one that said that, so that's on our agenda. That is true without any doubt in the ordinary world. But back where I started, the heart of this tonight is what I wanted you to see. Even in an area in which you would, and I'm not questioning it to begin with, that someone apparently is trying to pursue some extraordinary field of interest, a would-be mystic. They too will find themselves, I'll give my imaginary, illustrative would-be mystic, we'll give him a little more credit. He's not just run-of-the-mill drugstore mystic. That he even, let's say that he's heard this sort of thing, or that I warned him. He goes, okay, I know what you mean. Just don't get all involved with the instructions. Yeah. And by the way, Buddhism's full of that. Back to the example, especially the Zen, the later, which considered themselves even sort of the legitimate keeper, that they did not, that they stressed the avoidance, the escape from simply a theological argument and philosophical discussions to the actual experience of awakening. That they pushed it. So it's not unknown that this be pointed out. And so somebody could say, this imaginary person I'm seeing, they could agree that yes, there is obviously, whether I understand it completely or not, there's obviously some serious message in past attempts to do this that say, do not get all caught up in simply the instructions of it. All right, by God, that just sounds right. It just feels right. Regardless, back to my comment, it is inevitable that even such a person doing their best will find themselves either entangled with, which amounts to apparently dependent upon, but either entangled with it or struggling against it. You understand? Which, of course, ordinary people are going to say, well, the latter at least, it shows I hadn't fallen for it. You can call it anything you want to, but if you're struggling against it, that's like a man running around with this flypaper map hollering, I will get somewhere as soon as I get this son of a bitch, off my hand. And then it's, this kind of old vaudeville routine that's on his foot. And he steps on another foot and it's stuck on that foot. And he can say, well, I'm struggling against it. Consider, back to my little dramatics, that they put it in Buddha's mouth. They say that the man who was the epitome at the time, in his mouth, they put the words that his own enlightenment, that is, of being freed from thought-based, thought-held consciousness, that even after he saw what life was about, he says even his own awakening was not complete until he understood, bloom, a system. The Eightfold Noble Path. Regardless of whether it could be used, that's not the point. You understand that they even point back and put it in his mouth. That he says, well, even I understood what life was about, that life is an experience. That understanding what life's about is an experience, and it is not an idea. It is not a teaching. It's not something to think about. But I didn't understand completely until I understood this outline, this sketch here of what reality is. A new one, though, mine. That's no matter how you cut it. We're back to my little dramatic presentation earlier of, you mean, a man who saw reality at a new adult level, saw reality point blank in the eye, and even he said, well, my understanding is not complete until I have them out from my understanding. You didn't like that? A man who is more intellectually awake and said, well, yes, I am now more intellectually alive, but this new level of viability is not complete until I let some more blood back out, until I stab myself again. I am not as tall as I could be, even though I'm now taller than I ever imagined. I am not taller than I could be, but I'm not as tall as I really should be until I squat down a little again. That's what it amounts to at the dramatic, theatrical level. Now, here's what I'm trying to get at. I could talk for hours about trying to lead you up to this more casually about how this sounds, it can't be. We're dealing now, again, perhaps with a higher level, a metaphysical non sequitur. That how can it be that even he says, my understanding of life without maps and without diagrams, everything went before me, all of these monks, all of the ideas of torturing oneself, all of the attempts that had gone before him to awaken one, to cure this hunger. Now I got it, but after a while I realized I don't have it completely until I've lost it a little bit, until I back up and put it in some kind of systematic form. All right, I could pick on him. I could pick out everything from him to traffic court. Except the reality behind this apparent, kind of, Jesus, give me a break. How can it be both? How can a man who understands, or how can a man who, just taking their normal term has always been used of enlightened, that he sees life dead on, just sees reality dead in the eye, has the experience. And Buddha, according to the stories, he was not one of those pikers. He didn't have it once or like for 2 hours. And the man had it, and had it for years. He didn't die shortly. He didn't go get himself killed. He went around and had it. And yet they make him say, they say that he said, I had it, I knew it, but it was not complete until I backed up and put it in my mouth. Did the very thing that I escaped from, that anybody escapes from. Rather than you leave your view on a Buddha, on religion, on society, on civilization, on any institution, on any person, here's what it is. The reality behind the problem, behind the situation, is the demands of thinking itself. It doesn't matter what it is. But I wanted you to try, I was trying to make you think of it as being worse when we got into the areas of non-routine thinkers, non-traditional thinkers, someone, a Buddha. That the very thing he escaped from was ordinary map, ordinary systematic thinking, the ordinary shared reality with a collective herd, and he got out of it, succeeded, and they have him say, they say that he said, yeah, but it wasn't complete until put it in a form. It may have been a simpler form than was present at the day. It may have sounded better. It may have sounded more on the money, but they always do. But it wasn't his problem. It wasn't limited to him. It was not limited to any field, any activity within the invented post-survival world of man. It is in the nature of thinking. It is the demands of thinking. I will go ahead and say it for you. Do I assume, I'm hoping to assume, that most of you can already always put together one little piece that I am trying to point out. That's not all tonight, but trying to point out the difficulty, not the experience, but the difficulty in apparently trying to slip up, trying to work your way up to the kind of experience based upon, such as, just for an example, let's see what, all right, me doing this, that just comes to mind. And people think, well, you know, sometimes I feel like I'm closer to it, sometimes I feel like I'm further away, and then sometimes when you're really bad off, you think I'm closer to it, or I'm further away, what I'm talking about, or sometimes it makes more sense, and sometimes less sense, and sometimes I don't even know what universe I'm in. Why don't you just get down to it? You can. You can get down to it. Anyone who understands anything can whip out a map, can draw a map, come up with a new system, new terms on the spot. Well, I say anybody like they're on every corner, they're not. But it can be did. It is not that it, hate to brag, but it's not that's beyond my capabilities. You'll have to trust me. But if you stay on anything long enough, even the same terms, the same ideas, no matter how correct, no matter how specific, no matter how informative they may be, if you stay on the same idea, it will become a map. It will become systemic to you. That is natural. That is the nature. It has nothing to do with you individual. It has nothing to do with your background, and it certainly has nothing to do with you as an individual Homo sapien. It has to do with the demands of the human nervous system, of the mind specifically. It arises from down here, but in the mind, you cannot think without there being an apparent map. You cannot think for any length of time without it apparently being systemic. And by systemic, I'm not using that as a curse. I'm just trying to get you to see the difference. When I point out that, tying in from last time, I know it started out obscure, but notice this. In only 30 minutes, I've made it more so. Yeah. No, it's gotten better. Or is that the same thing? About the post-survival world of man growing organically, and people do not notice it. And then I point out tonight that there is a difference between the organic and the systemic. And my example was plant life is organic, but botany is systemic. It's not the same thing. And yet you can say, well, a botanist not only studies plant life, but he's probably an expert compared to us. No doubt about it. But it's two different things. Even that which apparently is mystical information, non-traditional maps, transcendental practices, they may well deserve the adjectives but they are still botany. They are still self-limiting themselves. All right, back to the apparent easier stuff. Isn't it easier when it sounds like you're talking about history or somebody else? I know everybody kind of perks up. Tied in with, it's back to Buddhism. They also have Buddha saying that the problem that men have, the dissatisfaction men have with life, is over them having improper desires. And then they go into all sorts of details and they cut it up into 100 pieces and then 200. I mean, anytime you feel like the map's getting too short, they can unfold it more. But they have him say, and this is, I'm sure many of you know, is still, if not a foundation, a permeating factor in all forms, just all kinds of, in a figure of speech, all manner of would-be mystical systems and philosophies and religions, mainstream religions, that men's problem, the Buddhists like to take it even further, that suffering and death, but it's discomfort. How about that? The irritation of being alive is based upon men desiring, having improper desires. Think about it, improper desires. Not morality in that sense, but improper desires such as a desire for fame, for wealth, for social position. And Buddha also supposedly pointed out that what makes them improper subjects for desire is they are impermanent. And that enlightenment, they have him say, that enlightenment itself is in some way going beyond that, transcending the desire for the things impermanent, things of the world, the Christians probably say, to things more universal and permanent. Sounds wonderful. I could unfold his amount and go all kinds of places with it. But now, listen to this. In the post-survival, at the post-survival level of human thought, what else is the mind going to desire? What can it desire? That was an easy one. Ordinary consciousness. It's past the level, up here, it's past the level of being involved with biosurvival. We're to the area now that the Buddhas and everyone else are interested in. The only place that one could have a transcendental, a non-routine experience. And yet they, including Buddha, it supposedly says, well, the thing holding you back is the desire for things impermanent. What else can it desire? Didn't help, did it? All right. Turn it around. At the biosurvival level, that is, from here down, from the level of consciousness here down, they've already taken care of everything permanent. Eating, sleeping. It's already taken care of. Once the security guards have checked the monitors again, which is for the medical students, it's the same thing. It's taking the body's vital signs. All you got to get there, just check every now and then. You got a string of monitors, and there you are. You're paid by the hour. You got the IQ of, a brick. That's all it takes. You just have to glance up. And after you've done that, what are you going to do? What's left to do? Daydream? Talk to yourself? Try to switch on a channel over here, or bring your own little TV and watch television. Watch a movie. So-called entertainment, which is just somebody else talking to yourself for you. The intention wasn't to slow things down and get a joke there, because that's not funny. Maybe that's why. Maybe I should be encouraged. That's why finally some of you are beginning to laugh. It's not funny. It's one of the few areas that it's safe enough to absolutely talk in either or, black and white, this and that. Well, all of you know by now what I'm talking about, but for the sake of anybody that walked in off the street or just watching on television, it's known by all kinds of names, like the conscious and the subconscious mind, which doesn't tell you much, but you do not, if you're a sane, ordinary person, you do not have to give intellectual attention to survive. Contrary, if you do, you're demented. You're a cull. They should have gotten you out of the chicken house at an earlier age. The consciousness that is singular to man does not have to think about that. It simply does not. What I want you to see is, if a guy named Buddha existed, now I started out pointing out that what is remembered that he said is about as, comparably speaking, is about as non-systematized, non-dogmatic apparent or would-be mystical information and data as you could look for. I don't mean it either. It's just comparably speaking. And yet you've got him saying, as they have it, and many people who would swear that they're non-traditional and making extraordinary personal efforts themselves, they still buy into this because it's permeated everywhere, even in Western religions, that man's main problem, but Buddha just put it non-religiously, that what made man discomforted, what kept you from being enlightened, was pursuing improper aims. And then they immediately, which sounds good, you go, all right, sin in the Western world. But improper aims, okay. And he says, and all improper aims can be described quite easily. They all fit one category. You go, all right, what? Things impermanent. And so you didn't have to put morality, just say things impermanent. Because, all right, fame, wealth. It has nothing to do with morality now, let's assume, from that view. But when it's impermanent, you know this, you can get rich and you can lose it. But if you get rich and you think, God, I'm happy, finally. I am rich, I am worth $1 million right here on paper, and suddenly your broker calls. A phone call, and you can no longer, it's possible that you're no longer rich. You know that. And we're not talking about, well, shame on you for being rich anyway. No morality, it's just a fact. Or you can be famous. You know, nowadays, fame is more so than ever since now they've gone past the 4-minute mile some years ago. Now even fame is more fleeting than it used to be. You can be famous now and not famous. You can be high up in the social world and make a terrible blunder and not be. There's the point. So he pointed out that there is why men suffer. Not in a moral sense, not in a religious sense, not because of paying off a debt. But you're going to be discomforted continually in life and thus not be able to pursue something extraordinary, such as your own enlightenment, if you're tied to those desires for the impermanent. And it just sounds, that's it. Except for this, folks. God, I wish I'd been there to help the boy out. But better late than never. Huh? It sounds great. But see, we're back to talking about maps now. That sounds, hey, that's got to be true. Because again, with no morality whatsoever involved, it is obviously a fact that being rich has nothing to do with being enlightened. Being famous has nothing to do with how much you understand. Being high or low in the social world has no bearing. It is not going to push you to be more intellectually aware, more alert, or not be. It just has nothing to do with it. So to say that the discomfort of being alive is caused by, then you might improve it a little bit and say, all right, it's supported by, it's continued by you pursuing desires for things impermanent. And you go, all right, that's true. You got me? I know it took a few thousand years for me to show up, but damn, the bus was late. Now I got to point out to you, that sounds fine except for this. The mind, which is the thing to be enlightened. The mind, I put it to you rhetorically, I'll try it again. What else is left for it to pursue? What is the post-survival? Why do I call it the invented world without it being pejorative? From the level of consciousness, human consciousness down, my little diagram, from here down, at the biosurvival, at the hormonal, physical level of man. Fame does not exist. Of course, you have the roots for all of this now. I was going to say social position doesn't exist. You've got all this springing from like territorial demands and springing from sex and etc. But as far as how we normally define it, fame, wealth, there's no such thing. You can't be wealthy from here down. You can hoard food, but wealth in the ordinary sense, you know that means money. That means chits. That means bookkeeping. It has nothing to do with actual possessions of I have enough food hidden in my cellar to last me for 20 years and therefore screw having to cut out coupons and all that other crap. You know that does not constitute wealth in the ordinary world. Wealth is, you can say, my basement is full of food. And most people think you're nuts if you said that. And they go, what? And if you said, well, wait a minute. And if you realize, wait a minute, they're beginning to look at me, you say, plus I have nearly $300,000 in my RA. Then they go, ooh. Which I got a bunch of numbers on paper. Can you eat them? No, we've been through that. At the from the level of survival down, there is none of the impermanent things. To consider that from here down that there is a mind, but there is consciousness because you've got your own cellular level. But from here down, the body, put it crudely, from here down, the body could not think about impermanent things. If you could make the body suddenly, if we could trick it or do some magic to where it spoke the same language for a few minutes, and you tried to tell the body what fame was, you described it, in social position, in being hip, being cool, being with it, being wealthy, and you described it to the body. And you, for a few seconds, it knew what you were saying, and you walked away. You do understand the body would just forget it. Because it does not exist. To the body, those things, it is true. Those things are impermanent. They're beyond that. They're unreal. It's just, boy, I knew they were crazy upstairs, but of course they can't do it. But it looks after those matters that are of permanent interest. This doesn't have to do it from the line above. You don't have to think about, should I go eat? Not if you're sane. Should I go to sleep? Or should I even sleep? Should I sleep this week? What month is this, Martha? Should I sleep this? That's all insane. That which is permanent is that which is necessary. That which is permanent is already taken care of. Doesn't matter how much education you got, how much sophistication, if you're sane. If just genetically you're in sound shape, you grow up, you do not have to think about things permanent. Remember, you just simply do not. It's a fact. And now you've got the Buddhas and the maps that are bought by the would-be mystics. No matter whether they use these terms or not, it is all across the board in all of these traditions, everyone's view, that part of what's holding us up from enlightenment is things to undo, which they call progress. Remember, I pointed out to you, what is called progress to them is damage control. It's not progress. Put it to you another way to expand it, since I'm using Buddhism. He says, or they say that he said, that you have got to break yourself from pursuing these desires for the impermanent because they go against the natural universal law. That is, we have got to take remedial action to get anywhere. We've got to go back downstairs somewhere and fix up the plumbing to ever launch this thing from the penthouse. Or some equally obscure and conflicting mixed metaphor. That was the best I came up with on the spot. How about I tried to and wasn't satisfied, and the world's full of people that don't mean to and succeed. Is there no justice? No, that'll be $50 and don't speed. Next! Okay. You see, I asked for that. But back to using Buddhism as an example. He says, they say he said, that to get anywhere, you have got to free yourself from pursuing these improper desires, and they're improper because they're impermanent, and to do so, what's holding you back is you are going against natural law, the natural law of the universe. Now, I refer you back to me and my presentation. What is the mind going to think about? What can it think about? What does it think about except those things impermanent? And the answer was, you should have figured out by now, nothing. But the best it can do is just distract itself. That's why I ask you the rhetorical question, that once the guards, these minimum wage security guards, once they periodically, again, they're supposed to be constantly doing it. If you're sane and sound, you do. You constantly, glance up. You do not have to take your pulse. You don't have to, check your blood pressure. Be a hypochondriactor. If you're sane at all you do is just constantly. That's all you got to do. There's a guard sitting down there in the lobby. They pay him just enough money to keep him awake. It's 8 hours, more or less. And you got this string of monitors, different shots. And all you just do this, just see if anything's all right. You just check, I'm alive, I'm eating, I'm asleep, my heart's not doing this, I feel okay. You do that, and that's all it takes every few seconds. Then what are you going to do? What's left to do with them? Accept all of the ideas back to the Buddhas at all. As they say that anything that men normally think about is improper because it's impermanent. But anything beyond minimum wage security guards, everything else after that, in that sense, is impermanent. The very things that then they say are unnatural, that go against, by God, the universal law. And people immediately bow down to that. They go, God, that's right. And you can say this has nothing to do with morals, nothing to do with organized religion. But let me just point out to you would-be mystics, you can't go around wanting to be famous, trying to get somewhere in life and get above your fellow man and how people admire you. Even if it works, that's not going to help you. In fact, you're hurting yourself. And all the people wearing natural clothes and eating only veggie burgers go, yeah. People that do otherwise are unnatural. Except for this. We're back to me pointing out what you should be able to see. All right, you can call it unnatural, and it just makes people just tingle all over. Those that really think that they would like to do something extraordinary, they go, yeah, that's right, that's right. All right, if that's right, that's right, that's right, then back to my presentation of it. My more up-to-date, more expansive map. What are you going to think of up here? And if that is what you're normally left with, then how in the world can you say, how in the world can you nod and go, that's right, to say that goes against the natural law of the universe? It is as organic to be a botanist for some guy over here, some woman over here. It is as organic for them to be a botanist as it is organic for the plant life to grow, for them to study. A zoologist, I'll try it again. Metaphors are a dime a dozen, sometimes you get 13. A zoologist could look at a botanist and go, what an unnatural occupation. I mean, it's one thing to be a zoologist or a psychologist. Go, a botanist. And it took you how long? Well, I didn't go to school any longer than that. And you studied plants. I studied men. I studied tigers. Or an economist. I study, well, we won't go into that. Do you understand? You could attack someone for being a botanist. You could attack someone for being a traffic court judge. But they became that just as organically as whatever it is they're participating. The judicial system, which is invented, the world's academic system, which is invented, wherein this botanist now teaches. The guy's doctorate degree, and he's an expert on plant life. But he became that, not in an unnatural way. Then we could have our would-be cheap-ass drugstore mystics say, well, a man who spent 20 years or 12 years becoming a doctor of botany and now thinks he's a big shot. Look at the way he dresses up. He's even got, custom license plate that says botany. And he thinks he's somebody. He makes everyone there at the university and in the town where he has a lot of accounts, spends money. He makes them call him. He insists. His cards say doctor. I mean, it's bad enough that people... right-thinking people understand that no one but a sawbones, nobody but a physician should call himself a doctor. Everybody else is a fake doctor anyway. It's bad enough to be a doctor of psychology or a doctor of economics, but a doctor of flowers and plants and weeds? Come on. And yet he makes them do it. So you could get would-be mystics go, you're right. Now that's the very kind of thing that the Buddha was talking about. Here's a man who spent 12 years of his life and now goes around all the time worried about his reputation, making sure that people, a student, when they say, well, Mr. So... that's Dr. So-and. Oh, I'm sorry. You can say, boy, how unnatural. No. At that level, in ordinary life, what he's doing is as organic and as natural as that which he's studying. That's what I'm trying to get you to see. Even though I started off, and some of you thought, aha, another quick little cutting insight when I said, hey, there's a difference between the organic and the systematic. Plant life is organic. Botany, systemic. Like one of them's real and natural, and one of them's kind of just man-made and doesn't amount to crap. It is man-made in the sense that man made it. But who in here is dumb enough to go, well, I'm a self-made man. Perhaps not dumb enough. Who would stoop so low as to take that kind of credit? Well, it's an old joke, but looks like some of you are dealing with old brains anyway. As long as a man's mind will accept the collective reality that there is a distinction between the natural life, the natural universe, or what they really like to do, all the way from Buddha right up to today, is say, well, what you're doing, what you're thinking goes against natural law. That will just give people the shivers. I'm talking about people that may be now working on their master's degree in mysticism. Not just upstarts, but people getting somewhere in the world. You go, yeah, but some of the stuff you're doing is unnatural. Some of the ideas you have is unnatural. The question. How can, again, not from here down you cannot do anything unnatural. Not if you're sane, not if you're sound. So we're establishing that that's the only people to whom I hope I'm speaking. It's the only people that should be listening. From here down, you are natural. You cannot be unnatural. If you're unnatural, you're suicidal. So you cannot, from the very level that distinguishes you from hippos, you cannot be unnatural. There's nothing you can do from here down that's unnatural. Unless you're killing yourself, and then, again, you don't count. From here up is where there seems to be this distinction that it is possible to do the unnatural. And by do, what are they normally referring to? Thinking. Now they call it other things. Well, having a dream of pursuing fame, as though that's a hobby. It's up here. Pursuing wealth, as though that's some behavioral thing. I know it sounds like it, but it's not. It's up here. You don't believe it? How about all those that didn't understand that you don't go to sports events at another level to simply see the game? Wealth is not behavioral. It's not from here down. It's from here up. And if you don't believe it, let me find a place in your brain. I know more or less where it is. I may have to muck up another part or two, but in most cases, you won't miss it. But I know the spot that affects wealth. And I can take my little hammer, or I can strip a wire off one of those, that floor lamp over that cheap one, and I can hit that part of your brain and cauterize it to where you won't understand wealth, and you won't work anymore for money. You will work for food without even having to stand by the freeway, and you might work for sex and a place to stay, but you will no longer work for money. You follow that? Maybe you just don't want to. If you can't think about the world of the intellect or anything therein, you won't pursue it. How's that? If you can't think about it, you won't do anything unnatural. Why is it so hard to stamp out pornography? In spite of the fact that finally, everybody loves to quote this now, that one of our upstanding Supreme Court justices finally wrapped it up for everyone's satisfaction for the time being is, well, no, you're right, we can't define it, but I know it when I see it. All I got to do is find that spot in his brain and cauterize it, and he won't know it when he sees it. Because if you can't see it, you can't call it something. Non-botanists can call botany an unnatural profession, an unnatural pursuit. They can say that any dreams you have that are up here, which is where they all are, you can say they're unnatural. The only thing that a man should be interested in is those things in the life that are permanent, such as. And then they normally say life, which what they're saying is death. The very attacks upon the things impermanent. The contrary, that if you say, all right, I can see that, then what fits the definition that the Buddhas and everyone else believes to be true? That they say, well, you're wasting your time, at the very least, and you're acting in contravention to your own best interest if you're trying to expand your awareness to pursue things temporal. You go, okay, now I got it. So what is the permanent? There's only one thing that fits the classification besides my joke about death. There's only one thing that fits the definition of it being permanent, of it not being polarized, of it not being able to turn into its own opposite, for it not starting out as a court of justice and then turn into a misnamed a tax office. There's only one thing that fits that definition: understanding. It's the only thing. And yet even those who think they're pursuing it, they will say otherwise. They'll have to say, nah, it's a map. Hate to disappoint you, but that was supposed to be in the punchline for the whole night. Now screw you, I hate to disappoint me. I hate for you to disappoint me. Minds at their best. Not ordinary minds, but would-be mystics. People that think they're interested in something, extraordinary information, understanding what life's about. If you get them up to the point and you say, well, everyone's always said that you cannot involve yourself in interest of things impermanent. And they go, I already got that. I got it. What you've got to do if you're going to ever have the experience, if you're going to be able to see life as it is, enlightenment, which simply used to mean simply seeing things as they are. That's what I want. You say, all right, you can't follow the impermanent. You can't follow the things that you normally think about. Okay, what do I follow? Then what are they expecting? What does the mind demand? A new impermanent map. Of course, I played in its hands a little bit by even giving you one word. But at least I picked out a word that's almost impossible to sit on: understanding. Because any fool can say, oh, well, I understand that. Now I'm talking about the nature of life. Oh, I understand it. Really? Yes, I have a Baptist understanding, whether they say it or not. Or I have a Jewish understanding, or I have an Italian understanding, or I have an old person understanding, or I have a young person. No. I said understanding. We shut the modifiers. But at any rate, the mind demands. That's the way it operates at the ordinary level. But real understanding would be something that's beyond the grip of partisan, polarized thinking, which is necessary from here down. At the survival level, you could not have made it this far. You are not sane and sound unless your operations from here down are based upon partisan, that is, preferring good food to bad food, preferring sleep to no sleep, preferring rest to no rest. From here down, it has got to be partisan, polarized. That's the old bio, still necessary, but that's the bio survival level. Necessary. From here up to the newer mental world, it's an encumbrance. And it's the very thing, though, that the rest of the would-be mystics say, well, that's what we've got to deal with. But they don't know how to deal with it. Yeah, they do. Give me a map. Tell me how to deal with it if you know how. Don't just keep talking about it. Tell me what to do. All right, I have this thing. I'm glad we got to this point. I have what's known as the fivefold, supernoble, supercharged. I forgot to tell you, you're supposed to fade out here. Fade out! You're supposed to be in the tail end. See, like I was going to tell the secret and you're supposed to fade out. That's what happens when nobody comes to rehearsal. We have rehearsal? What rehearsal?